Oh no, I'm in a fight. Let's use my submission grappling. Get my guard. Get my guard. So Alex, back when I used to train a lot more Kaiju Kempo than I do now, we would go do a technique, take the guy down, hurt the guy, take him down, finish him off, and then we'd back up, and we'd always check behind us like that. So that was a way that, what we were told, integrating environmental awareness into the technique, that we're maybe focusing on one person for a second, but then we're checking behind us. And I think it's actually a really good habit to get into. And I imagine that stuff like that came from the traditional Japanese Jujutsu. Are there examples in the training that you've done that are similar to that?
Oh yeah, it's actually, as a matter of fact, I'd say it's front and center in all of the training. For Takenouchi Ryu and for some of the other Koryu that I've done, every technique ends with what's called zanshin, the remaining mind. And this is a term that gets bandied about quite a bit, and some people...
The remaining mind? I thought it was the empty mind.
In this case, the character that they're using for the zan is nokoru as a verb reading. So it's something that's left over. And so in this case, when they're talking about zanshin, it's the remaining heart or remaining mind. It's what's happening after the transaction has ended. And every form ends with this. So the thing is that they tend to do it, and it's this quiet thing where basically they end the encounter, they pull back, and then they try to absorb in all of the data they can about their situation. So what you were describing in the Kaiju Kempo training is excellent because, of course, one of the problems that you have when you're engaged in fight or flight, in some cases can be a narrowing of one's visual field, of focusing on one thing, which actually can lead to a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of inability to see one's surroundings effectively.
Getting balled by the guy behind you.
Precisely. So the idea that you would stop and actually have a reflex of looking around the room is excellent. I think that's a really great habit.
Okay. I remember watching Shogun fight in the UFC after his long layoff, and they'd be engaged, and then when he was backing up, he'd always put his arms out like this. And I don't know if it was stretching or if it was feeling for the edge of the cage. Now, of course, in a UFC environment, you're only ever fighting one opponent. If you're fighting more than one opponent in an MMA environment, something's gone drastically wrong.
Or you're fighting in Russia.
Yeah, the team sport, the team combat. Man, that's insane. Somebody's going to die. That is one of the craziest things I've ever seen.
It's disturbing.
Yeah. But that's kind of an environmental awareness, even in a one-on-one situation, because if you and I clash, and then I back up, and I get run into the cage, that's a bad thing. If I don't want to be run in a cage, if I want to be free, and if I don't want to clinch up against that thing, then that's kind of using that tool, the hands being way out there, to feel for the cage. That's what I'm interpreting what he was doing. Maybe he was just trying to stretch his pecs, maybe he was just trying to relax his arms. So physically, what does the environmental awareness look like in the Japanese systems?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're considering your environment, it's going to be something where if you're doing effective zanshin, there should be a little bit of it left in your daily life as well. So in the dojo, it's going to come down to engaging with your opponent, and when you break off, you study the totality of your environment. You're considering these questions like, okay, is this person truly out of the fight that I've just dealt with? Who's the next person? How many of these next people might there be? How many people that perhaps are associated with me may be now having a problem as well? Do they need help? Where are the escape points? What's tactically superior in your environment? So communications, improvised weaponry, topography, how do you utilize these things so that you're able to make sure your next move is a wise move and that you're not just flailing wildly.
So it's not as much a physical thing that you do, it's a mental process, it's a mental checklist that you go through.
Precisely.
Okay.
Precisely, because the idea is that you want that to be the reflex. In the same way as the Kaiju Kempo training that you were describing, you want that reflex where you never do the technique and then just walk away and assume that it's over. There's a famous story that I remember hearing about years ago with a police trainer, I think it was, who'd gotten very, very good at handgun disarms.
I've heard this. This is a fantastic, whether it's true or not, is a fantastic story.
It's a fantastic story, and it may be an urban myth, but...
Okay. Sorry, tell the story.
Okay, sorry. So, yeah, basically you have this fellow who had trained a particular handgun disarm, and he got blazingly fast with it. And anyway, he was teaching other people and what have you. And he's out on patrol one day.
So when he's training, he's taking the gun away and then giving the gun back to his training partner so he can do the drill again. And thousands of repetitions the way you're supposed to.
Precisely. However, he never paused and did that look around or any of these other things. He just simply did it and then handed it back, and to get the most reps in. That's his method. The problem was, of course, that your central nervous system doesn't differentiate primary versus secondary habits. So, needless to say, he ended up in a situation where a gun was in his face, and he did the lightning fast disarm, which was great. But before he knew it, he handed it back to the perp. Mm-hmm. And then he had a major fight on his hands, so the story goes.
Damn, now I did it a second time.
So don't be that guy, I guess is the message. And so Zanshin is kind of about all that.
Okay. Now, people always diss modern jiu-jitsu systems, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, submission grappling, as self-defense systems. You're like, what about multiple attackers? So those same people would probably not argue that classical Japanese jiu-jitsu was all about self-defense in the real world. So what do you guys do? Do you actually train against multiple? Do your kata involve multiple attackers?
Yes, there's some.
Okay.
Yeah, and every form that you're doing, because of this Zanshin element,
right,
you're always thinking about it. You're always aware of that. You're never in denial of that potential reality. So the assumption is that whoever you're dealing with is armed. Whoever you're dealing with is bigger and stronger than you. Whoever you're dealing with has friends. They too may be armed. They may be bigger and stronger. And therefore, you're always trying to work back from that fundamental assumption.
Sure. And that's the mental thing. I'm just wondering how it expresses itself physically. So there are some kata where you've got more than one person.
Yes. Yeah, and we train in... we will set up scenarios where, for example, we'll have people engaging, but we'll make sure that there's other people in and they're engaging and coming in from unexpected angles, and as soon as you take one person down, the next person's on you, and that sort of thing. So, you can certainly do that, or multiple opponent sparring as well.
So the multiple opponent sparring would be more like a Aikido randori?
It could be, but actually...
Because I've always thought that was a big source of confusion, because judo randori is basically all out sparring except for kicking each other in the balls and punching each other in the face. And Aikido randori, you see Aikido people defend their art as a street applicable system by saying, oh, we do randori. But it's a bit disingenuous.
Yeah.
Because it's a very highly, super tightly constrained system. You're living in a world where people attack you one at a time with overhand knife hand strikes.
That's true. And the other problem, of course, is that some people don't realize it, but if you look closely in a lot of those training sessions, there's little subconscious cues, or I should say small cues that are given, like, here's my wrist, why don't you grab my wrist, or why don't you come smoke me in the head. And so, of course, if you're inviting the attack and you're defining what attack is to be brought on you, I don't think you can call that randori. When you look at the word randori, it literally means to seize chaos. That's ran is chaos. So the idea that you have something where it's prearranged and you're still calling it randori, to me is disingenuous. As a matter of fact, it's just simply incorrect. You can't use the word that way. So no, when I'm talking about sparring or randori, what I mean is that you actually have people that are coming in with unexpected attacks at unexpected times. And when we do it, we may have it where, we'll have a mix of grappling and striking. There'll be some times where, we'll put on like lacrosse gear or other protective gear, and then we'll just let everybody do everything, in which case weapons may be involved, striking, full force may be involved, throws may be involved.
Taking us right back to Russia.
That's what it
It's so deadly we can only do it in Russia. Yeah, I've done 2-on-1 grappling, and that's tiring, but it's possible. And I've done 2-on-1 kickboxing sparring, and I'll say that's exhausting. That is, you get tired so quickly. Now, I didn't do a whole lot of it. Maybe if I did that every single week, you'd get better at it. But fighting two people at once is at least 4 times as tiring as fighting one person.
Indeed. Yeah, well, because you've got this whole problem of trying to line them up so that you're not engaging them simultaneously. Because if you end up being the guy in the middle when there's 2-on-1, there's no way you're going to make it work. I don't care how fast you are, you're going to get hit. So you've got to get them lined up so that one person is being frustrated by the relevant position of the other person. And just the maneuvering in order to ensure that is quite exhausting, because you've got to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time, constantly then engaging and trying to figure out where the other person's going to be moving around to try and re-engage you. So.
Or using environmental factors to channel your. I mean, the Spartans are the most famous example. 300 holding back 1,000,000 or something like that at a narrow pass. But certainly there are many examples where, and maybe it's over-romanticized in history, and especially oral traditions, where one person held a bridge long enough for a retreating army to retreat, or a small force held a choke point. So if you're fighting multiple people, the trouble is, in a dojo setting, we're most often doing that in a dojo, big open area. Mm-hmm. Maybe more realistically would be, in a parking garage where there's lots of cars, where ideally you get the two people lined up, one behind each other, in two cars, and in the worst case scenario, you're trapped in the middle of the two cars, and they're coming at you from both sides, in which case your parkour skills better be top notch.
Yeah, you'd need that. I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios, and that's one of the things that I think is interesting, is if you have the opportunity to do this, is to find other environments to train in. Because, for example, you just never know where things are going to go down. It might be in the middle of a subway car. It might be inside your car. As a matter of fact, I actually saw a video a few years back where there was a group that was doing grappling inside a car. So you had somebody where an attacker was coming from either inside the car or from outside the car, and then the person had to be able to fight their way out. And they were doing it actually with a firearm being involved. So they had to basically control the firearm and then be able
and
to...
the car's on fire. And it's a radioactive car.
Gets worse and worse, yeah. But yeah, it was interesting.
How did it change it? 'Cause I've not seen this.
It was interesting because you actually saw a lot of movements that looked a lot like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because as the grappling progressed and the person was fighting within the vehicle, they could lean into the seat, bring their feet up, try to utilize all four limbs. So it was a guard game inside a car, and while trying to make sure that the firearm was pointed in the relevant right direction. So it was very interesting.
Although I normally poo-pah people who think they're going to bite their way out of a jiu-jitsu situation, I think in that situation, where position is so much harder to achieve, I think I would probably start biting.
Whatever you can.
If I amputate the trigger finger with my incisors, it's going to be hard to pull that trigger.
It makes it a lot more difficult, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're in that range, of course, and I think we talked about this in that podcast.
Episode 108, There's my podcast.
You've got, a number of different, I guess what would be considered the dirty fighting, the grapple, when you're biting or you're squeezing and, clawing, gouging, those sorts of things. When you're at that range, it does have an effect.
See, I think now we're progressing from environmental awareness to dirty fighting, but I think my final position on this is this. Yes, biting and gouging of eyes, all that stuff works, but it's the delivery system for it that needs to be trained. Mike Tyson never once trained running up to somebody and biting their ears. No matter what trainer was holding the focus mitts, they never, ever, ever drilled that. But because he was so good at focus mitts and punching people in the head and the maintenance of range and footwork, when it came time to close and bite someone's ear, it was easy to do. It's easy to tack that deadly tool onto a delivery system. You've got this ICBM, and you can put whatever you want on the tip. You can put a thumb eye gouge on the tip of that ICBM. You can put a nuclear weapon. You can put a bite. So it's the training of the delivery mechanism. So in the same way that a traditional Japanese leg lock that's sort of the delivery mechanism, maybe, for a dagger strike, for cutting the guy's femoral artery with your tanto or whatever.
Yeah.
The delivery system is the leg lock, but what's being actually delivered isn't the leg lock at all.
That's right. And that's where sometimes appearances can be deceiving, because what you think you're getting is not necessarily what the end point truly is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so any finishing words on advice to people who want to make whatever martial art it is they train more environmentally aware or more more relevant to dust streets?
Well, yeah, I think that, whatever you're drilling, just be very conscious of what we've been discussing in this conversation that we've had. Don't assume that, what you're doing on the mats and what associated habits there might not be things you're going to take away with you, and that might end up coming back to bite you if you're not careful. So be very mindful of all of your training and every element that's involved in it. So if you're doing a drill, make sure that you pause for a moment to remember this is a combative drill. It's not just me doing an athletic movement over and over again.
Okay. Well, based on your advice then, I'm starting right now, I'm never going to release any choke ever again to tapping, because I don't want to program myself to release a choke in a real fight when the guy taps. Everybody's going out, everybody's going unconscious, so they're drooling on the mats. Thank you, Alex.
There you go. Thank you.